Hello everyone, my name is Cody Wasuda, Restoration Coordinator here at Circle, and I'd like to welcome you to our first workshop of the day, the Ecology of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The Circle office sits on the ancestral home of the Nisenan tribe, and we work within the intertribal region of the Mountain Maidu, Concow, and Washoe peoples. At this point, I'd like to pass it over to our moderator, José González. José, please take it away.
Thank you so much, and I also greet you all from the ancestral tradition and stolen lands of Nisenan, Maidu, Miwok, and among many others in Northern California. And with this, we're going to start this session with an offering. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to one of our guests and panelists, Carla Marie.
Inkata. Welcome. Kainkara Carla Marie Munoz. Gaha Costanoan Rumsen Carmel Tribe, Gaha Rumsen Ohlone. I'm speaking to you in Rumsen Ohlone, and I'm calling from the territory of Yelamu, where the spoken language was Ramaytush. It's in the Bay Area, present-day San Francisco. I'm here in representation and acknowledgement of the land and the suffering of the ancestors that came before me and the future that's ahead of me. I want to acknowledge that there was 3 genocides that happened to the California people here, but that we are still resilient today by evidence that I am still here, that we are still existing. There is an excess of 250 languages spoken here, diverse cultures, only in California. Those are many different cultures that are responsible for the landscapes that make up the beauty that is California. So I speak to you from my beautiful homeland, where it is an honor and a privilege to be here and connected. And I offer a song for the sun, the light source that we all need so much. Ishmen is the sun in our language, and it's the beginning of every day and a new start to all. So I offer this song for all of you, and to create space in your mind for what we're about to do today, and to remind you that we're still here, we still exist, our culture is alive and well. Oh, Inkatan, Sharuru, blessings and thanks. Thank you, José.
Thank you. I want to make sure that everyone that's viewing this is able to sit with that offering. And it's a reminder that it comes with many facets. So please make sure that all of you were able to experience the offering hopefully in more ways that you might have been used to. And I have the privilege, really the opportunity for the privilege, I consider it a privilege given this group of peers and colleagues to be the moderator for this session, which has the title, The Ecology of DEI, and we'll unpack that a little bit more. I think we really want this to be a modeling and practicing of the types of conversations that, as Carla mentioned, that'll guide us forward, not ignoring the real harm of the past and present. And what do we mean about being able to change these components? So I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the framing of what the conversation that we will have here, as well as being able to take some questions from the audience. So know that as well. I also want to acknowledge that, we'll be gentle with ourselves given everything that's going on right now, and that we're meeting to digital forms. So as pets, loved ones, significant others, disruptions in internet service happens, we'll still be here present with each other. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to have each of our panelists introduce themselves so that you get to hear from them how they want to be seen, heard, and valued in this space and what they're offering you about themselves. We will start off with Francis, and then you'll pass it around until we conclude with everybody.
José. My name is Francis Mendoza, and I go by he, they, Sila pronouns. I'm here on the unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone, here in present-day Union City, Tuibun land. And actually, you'd be surprised because my background is Mono territory over in the Eastern Sierra. But I want to acknowledge the original people who are still here with us today. And I'm a naturalist based out of the Oakland Bay area. And I'm also the director of the JEDAI section of NAI. Lots of acronyms there, I know. But JEDAI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, Accessibility, and Inclusion. And NAI is the National Association for Interpretation. Thanks for having me.
You get to pass it on, Francis.
I'd like to pass it to Leslie.
Thank you, and hello everyone. My name is Leslie Parra, and I am currently living in San Francisco for the last 19 years. So I am lucky and honored to say that I am sharing this land with the Ramaytush and Ohlone people. And I would say that my career calling has been to foster and encourage underrepresented communities and connect and reconnect with science and nature and outdoor recreation and everything that involves that. And I'm also very happy to be the program, the outreach program manager for, say, the Redwoods League. And I believe that the Redwoods Forest and Sequoia Forest are iconic to California, and I'd love to see more representation of the populations that exist in California, in not just connecting, but in representation. And I am really very lucky to be here, and thank you for José for inviting me. And I will pass it on to my colleague and friend, Linnea Hardlund.
Leslie. Hi, my name is Linnea Hardlund, and I am joining everybody today from the Yosemite National Park area. And Yosemite is associated with 7 tribes that call this area their homeland. And as we have been saying, these people still live here in this area and are still present. And those tribes are the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation, the Bishop Paiute Tribe, the Bridgeport Indian Colony, the Mono Lake Kutzidika, North Fork Rancheria of Mono Indians of California, and the Picayune Rancheria of Chukchansi Indians, and finally the Tuolumne Band of Miwok Indians. And I'd also like to recognize that 2 of those tribes are still seeking justice and federal recognition, and those are the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation and the Mono Lake Kutzidika. As Leslie said, I am honored to be here and honored to be her colleague and friend at Save the Redwoods League, and my job there is Giant Sequoia Forest Fellow. And so I work within the Sequoia Range and specialize in fire ecology, but I'm also very passionate about education and connecting people to nature and to outdoor places. So thank you so much for having me here today. And lastly, but certainly not least, Carla.
Thank you so much. Carla Marie Munoz, Rumsen Ohlone. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I'm here because of 7 generations of prayer. I'm here because my mother, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother prayed for me. And I'm gonna be here to influence my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren. I'm here as a vessel for not only my people, but for my community. I'm here to share knowledge so that there may be understanding. I'm here standing today in a beautiful place that's like winning the cultural lottery for my tribe. I'm one of 2,000 that are separated from their ancestral homeland that now thrive here and can have an authentic connection with the land. I'm here because the California state recognizes me, but our government does not. I'm not a federally recognized Indian, but I know my ancestry. I know my deep-rooted history, and my people have been here for hundreds of thousands of years as caretakers of this land, but as pillars to show us how we can truly live in harmony with nature and not take too much. My present day job is I'm here working as a tribal councilwoman in recognition for my specific tribe, which is the Costanoan Rumsen Carmel Tribe. I specialize in cultural education and representation. I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of cultural educations within school programming, but most of all, I'm a facilitator for our youth in our own tribe and build authentic connections with the land, because since they're from Southern California, they don't get to come up here and have a richness or a closeness with this place. So most of my work is centered in creating an authentic relationship in present day spaces that aren't easy accessible. Most of our sacred sites are now owned by private landowners, maybe land trusts, state parks, regional parks, or federal parks. So I have to work in unison with these people as a tribal liaison in order for us to continue on our ceremony, to carry on our dances, and to learn about the ecology that these beautiful landscapes have to offer. And that's my spill. Thanks. Shivaruda.
Thank you. And I'm grateful for how you have shared yourself, really. I think I'm always grateful for having that opportunity, a space of how you get to choose, right? How you offer to present yourself to others. For me, I think I mentioned a little bit José González, he, him, his, although I'll respond to anything offered with respect. And I wear many proverbial hats. I mean, I'm coming into this space with many proverbial hats, some of which are professional, collegial, and community oriented in terms of the organizations, associations, governance committees, and stuff and so forth that I serve on. But really, I want to honor that transition that has been offered here about what we intend to kind of work with this space. I'll share a little bit of framing, and then we're really going to engage for at least 30 minutes or so in conversation around these topics before we jump into questions from the audience. So the audience, though you're not restricted to only sharing questions at the end, please drop them in the chat, or drop them, put them in there, and they'll make a way over to us. And as Francis noted, right, so many acronyms, and you might hear DEI, JEDAI, and they all have some variation around equity, inclusion, diversity, access, justice, and so forth. And part of the evolution of that language has been about really to better understand, engage with, unpack, and undo when we talk about like systemic inequities, some of which are pretty direct and harmful, as Carla has mentioned and others, that this was, for example, physical and cultural genocide of many communities, and that it matters when we say this is stolen land and these are broken treaties, and this is what stolen labor has been built around our modern day country and societies and states. And that's not an invitation to feel that discomfort and run away, but rather to be able to say, how could we build differently? And hence the evolution of those terms, and for me to unpack that. And I'm going to share 2 slides as to kind of point a bit of that out. I think part of why this slide from Dr. Rupia Maria resonated with a lot of people was to be able to say, we'll encounter all of these terms, and some people will have familiarity with some of them, less with others, but it resonates, right? Because we can recognize an interconnected system of harm, and how this can be perpetuated if we don't do something about it or tackle it or do differently. And what she termed as, colonization being a main driver force of this, the writer Michelle Holliday was kind of saying, even underpinning that as a mechanistic reductionist worldview, is how we maybe only see the natural environment and through some extension ourselves as being overly driven by a cognitive kind of engagement with the world, an object basically treating the land, treating nature, treating ourselves and each other as objects, right? And what that can do. And what I have found was that by flipping this, being able to say, in addition to what we're fighting against, it's what we're fighting for, that the language of ecology can be helpful, can be instructive, can provide some orientation. Of course, being attentive that we are, as much as we are part of nature, we also are kind of endowed with specific gifts. And what does it mean to not say, oh, well, let's use this life affirming language and still only be reductive about it. And so hence the invitation, right, of what can be considered sacred, other ways of knowing and being and engaging and respecting the land, nature, and by extension each other. And so that's why with the language of ecology, I put this invitation to my colleagues here to be able to say, if this can be helpful, how do we talk about fire? How do we talk about edge effects? How do we talk about mycelium? How do we talk about redwood habitat and all of these quote unquote natural elements that are also instructive in how do we undo these systems of harms that we have with each other, so that we tackle these. And so that's kind of the framing and invitation in terms of what I'm asking our panelists to engage with. So the first question is going to be an open one to anyone that likes to tackle it first. We're not gonna force everyone to go around and say you all have to answer the question in the same way. You are invited to, of course, and you also can just be like, I'll wait to the next question, and you can extend on what others are saying and ask questions of each other. And my first question is, we've been using the word ecology. I've also been using kind of the terms DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and so forth. So really for you, what comes to mind when I use the term ecology, or when you hear words like DEI? How does that resonate with you? Like, what comes to mind? How do you interpret it? How do you engage with it? How do you detach from it? How is it useful to you, not useful to you, and so forth? And I'll leave it open to see who would like to start first.
I'll start. Thank you, Jose. Coming from a biology background, I quickly learned that when I got my undergrad degree at Berkeley, I didn't want to go into academia. And partially the reason why is because I already wanted to get out into the community and start teaching, formally as a teacher, informally as a naturalist, an environmental educator. But academia is wrought with social systems of hierarchies, patriarchal systems where women, trans folks, ethnic minorities such as myself, I'm Filipino. I came here when I was a 5-year-old child, an immigrant, and those kinds of things are barriers for many folks, including myself. And I wanted to work directly with the community, and I've been doing so for the past 25 years, not necessarily as an ecologist, but someone who understands the ecology and the different perspectives that are a part of that, not just an academic standpoint, but one that incorporates indigeneity, that incorporates a worldview, a global view. Even though we're minorities in this country, many brown and black folks are people of the global majority. So all of these things come together in play to hopefully ensure that we're taking care of our environment, even though many multinational companies are not taking care of it and using the environment for profit. And in the slides that José shared, many of those things can be seen in the first flow chart, but I'd like to shift the perspective to the thrivability and life honoring worldview that he offered in the second chart.
Thank you, Francis. Anyone else would like to add? Otherwise, I'll have another question ready for you.
I, like Francis, my undergraduate degree is in biology, and I specialize in ecology. And I also quickly realized I didn't want to be in the academic field, and so I realized I wanted to be outside and be connected with the land and the species that I cared most about, and my background or my association with ecology is still somewhat of a more academic association. And as I have moved further throughout my career, and especially now in my current position and working a lot with Leslie, I just have been able to realize how you can weave different aspects of ecology. Ecology is not just an academic word. It includes, the ecology of place and communities and people, and how all of those different aspects interact with each other. And it's something that I am, it's an ever evolving word for me, I guess I should say, that has started out as a very strict academic textbook word and has now evolved into something that's totally different, but in a way is so much more inclusive and captures so many more different aspects of life, and includes so much more diversity just within that one word.
Thank you, Linnea. And Carla, you look ready.
Yeah, I was ready. I just want to say that ecology to me resonates a lot, but as traditional knowledge that's been passed on as teachings from generation to generation. And for me, that word never held any weight because I don't come from a college background. I'm definitely more self-educated when it comes to culture and landscapes and the interaction of our people with those landscapes. There was no book, rhyme, or reason that told me I had to ask all the questions and get those answers by actually going on those landscapes and seeing what those medicines do and what we use those things for in non-excess. And so for me, ecology is just this fancy word of saying how we lived and how we survived and how we continue to thrive and not take too much and have healthy landscapes and be able to return to these places to receive those sources. And then when I think of the term DEI, I mean, for me, I never thought that as an Indigenous woman, I would be included in that. I would think that I would have more priority of say. Unfortunately, with the way that these parks and systems are designed, they are definitely more, I would say, catered to a certain individual that isn't native to the land, that maybe not have a strong relationship, maybe just use it for recreational uses. I don't know, but for me, that word sounds like there's a huge, inequality. Apparently, not enough access for people, not enough, the basics. We all need to breathe the air of the trees. We all need to receive the fresh water in order for us to survive as a people. And so we need access to place. So to diversify that is a God-given right. Everyone deserves those things. And so for me, when I hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, I feel like it's kind of, it's a false thing because I don't see it happening all the time. and I don't see many policy changes that allow us to move up in places or to thrive in sacred spaces or to even have access to those places. So to say diversity, equity, and inclusion, I feel like we need to really work harder on what that means. We really need to work harder in the influences that we have to instill those systems, because otherwise we're not going to know how to get along with nature if we don't know how to get along with each other and know that we have to share these things. These things are not just for us, they're for all of us because we need it. And so to me, those words are brand new to me in the last maybe 6 years. But I've been proud to say that in a lot of spaces now, I've been invited to give that story of our relationship to the land and how we offer our different prayers in order to receive these sacred spaces. And so I've been on a lot of panels speaking about it. I've been in a lot of areas speaking about it. And all I know is that the more I speak about it, the more change we need to have, because these should already be in place. There should be no reason that we're talking about these systems, because they should already be inclusive to all. Everyone should have access to everything, because we all need nature to survive.
Well put. Thank you, Carla. Leslie?
I'll add a little. So I actually I did a master's in conservation biology, and one of the reasons why I got into community outreach was because I felt like the people were out of that lens of what I was getting in academia. And in terms of conservation, we tend to be very species specific. And I think, that's not how ecology works. There's systems, they work together, they flex, they adjust, and humans are part of that. So I think it's so important. That's why I think for me, having the people who inhabit the lands as well being part of the stewardship and the care, because it's a reciprocal relationship. So those are the things that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll jump into an example. And I want to stress the different points that you all brought up, right? One of them is the dangers of being overly caught up in academia and how it can narrow your approach, or it can perpetuate that reductionist model of how we engage with nature. And I've often say, in many cases for me, it's not automatically bad, and it can be if that predominates the way that we engage. Because I think the fragility will kick in and think it's like, you're attacking science. I'm like, no, I'm just saying it's dangerous when we default to that being the only way of knowing and framing and valuing how to understand, relate to, and so forth. And that we can't also just be able to say, as Carla's noted, right, without the degree, then you don't hold any value or credibility and knowledge, because community happened to have been engaging with the landscape pretty well without any academic institutions for the past X thousand years. And so I think it's those important reminders. And so I want to jump into an example because I want to, part of this is knowing that we're weaving that space between always being cautious about over intellectualizing something, right? It's like, if you don't know the terms DEI, and we're not here to explain those, this is not what this panel is, then you don't understand the work. But also remembering that these are real lived experiences, as Carla reminded us, like these are fundamental relationships with nature in terms of like being alive. And so I want to use the example of fire, because I think fire has become a type of almost case study in quote unquote natural resource management, right? In terms of how we are, knock on wood, I'd like to think we're transitioning out of a model that was repressive, that if any type of fire in the forest is bad, put it out. This is your Smokey Bear type of campaigns. This is the way to say we're protecting the forest, but really because we want to save the wood as a natural resources, I think, rather than considering the thrivability and the health of the habitat. And we're hearing more about how we are, as Carla mentioned, listening to traditional ecological knowledge about the multifaceted value and role of fire. And as the work that Leslie and Linnea that you do about understanding that a fire adapted ecosystem for areas like Redwoods and Sequoia can help, The problem is that if we've been overly repressive, by the time that fire hits, it can be destructive in ways that is not good. And so I'd like to hear from you, what, how do you relate to and understand fire, either from that traditional ecological sense or just what you've been learning now, and B, that comparison to what I've often say, like the fire of us not being able to deal with conflict and tension in relating to each other, and we treat conflict and tension as any type automatically bad without understanding, like we might have to have fire conflict adapted ecosystems within ourselves, so that if we don't pay attention to those, by the time that something blows up, it's going to be just as destructive as a wildfire in the landscape. And that's just, then you're just dealing with different consequences. So like, that's kind of what I'm curious in terms of fire. What are the relationships, the comparisons, the metaphors, the challenges, growth that you see?
I can start. So I mean, like you said, Jose, I work in a very fire adapted ecosystem. The Sierra Nevada in general is a very fire adapted ecosystem. And historically, there were multiple types of ignition within the Sierra Nevada. And most commonly, that was by lightning, but also very commonly was by indigenous burning. And those two worked in sync together and really shaped the landscape in a really profound way. And by pulling those two ignition sources out of our landscape, we have totally changed it within the last 150 or so years after colonization. And we're living through those destructive effects now. Many of us, if you're joining us from California, everybody who lived in our state this past year was feeling the effects of destructive wildfire this summer. And I think that it's important to note that fire is not bad for the ecosystem, and fire should be a welcome part of our lives. It was part of California's blood almost, in a way, historically. And our ecosystems were shaped for thousands of years by people who lived here before us and are still living here. And that knowledge has been carried down with them of how fire interacts with the ecosystem and how they interact with the ecosystem and how we interact with the ecosystem with fire. And I think that one of the things that I think is really important about bringing fire back into the ecosystem to remember is that fire creates a resilient ecosystem. And fire also increases diversity within our ecosystem on so many different levels. It increases plant diversity, it increases tree diversity, both in terms of species and size of trees, different height classes of trees, different crown structures of trees. And all of those things work in sync. And the more diversity we have, the more resilient of an ecosystem we're going to have. And in a way, I sort of think of that the same with how, connecting people to that ecosystem and thinking about ecosystems as communities of people as well. The more diversity we have within our ecosystem, the more resilient we're going to be as a community. In terms of who we interact with and who we relate to, and what types of perspectives we have and voices we lift up within our communities and within. I work with a lot of fire, and so how do we increase voices, more diverse voices, and increase the knowledge within reintroducing fire into our ecosystem so that we can reintroduce fire in a way that is more diverse. The more diverse knowledge we have, the better we are going to be at implementing different practices on the ecosystem and on the land, and the ecosystem will respond. And I think we see it is now we're losing so much in these wildfires that are completely, we've got so much more high severity than we've ever seen historically. We have hotter and drier summers, and it's just fueling this negative feedback cycle. But if we can get more, here where I am, mixed conifer, if we can get more low to moderate severity fire on the landscape and burn around these monarch giant sequoia, which are thousands of years old, some of them, we can't replace them once they're gone. We can build a more resilient ecosystem, and in building a more resilient ecosystem, we can build a more resilient community together if we are lifting up diversity of voices and building diversity into our ecosystem. And so perhaps we think of restoring an ecosystem with fire in a different light, and it's not just the restoration of the plant communities and the forest, but maybe it's also a restoration in terms of how do we restore an ecosystem so that we can continue to respond positively as a community of people with that ecosystem. I think I could go on for a really long time about this, but I want to give other people to talk, a chance to talk as well.
Of course, and please know this won't be the end of the conversations, and there'll be opportunity to follow up with people afterward. So I appreciate that. So a few other people getting ready would like to jump in. Carla.
Yeah, I would like to share a little about the sacredness of the fire. One of the teachings that my grandfather gave to me and to our people was that there's a burning fire in the sky, Ishman. And that same fire is in the core of our earth, and it's what makes the whole earth move. But it's the same fire that we dance around in ceremony. And that fire represents the fire that's inside of us all. And so that fire, to me, with that teaching, is very interconnected to the sacredness of who we are and how we need to be in the world. From what I know about fire, as soon as you burn things, it gives opportunity for new things to grow. It brings seeds so that the birds can come and eat those seeds. It brings stalks so the deer can come and eat and graze on those stalks. It brings trees so that we can breathe. It brings so much diversity in nature. That fire is so powerful, but it's such a powerful thing that it has to be respected. And that's something that we do all the time. All of our ceremonies are centralized with the fire, many of which fires have been burning for more than 4 days or more. That's very hard to do in modern day California. It's very hard to have a fire for more than 4 days here because of the risks that are involved. But those are for people that are irresponsible with fire. We have a fire tender whose job it is to feed that fire day and night, to know when to keep that fire up and bright for the dances and when to keep it low so that we can keep the sanctity of the wood that is being offered to that fire, to the prayers that are being offered to that fire. That fire is our connection to the spirit world. That is how we pray. We pray to that fire. We pray around that fire. So many indigenous communities believe dancing around a fire is central to how they celebrate and who they are. So for me and the work that I do now in organizing ceremony, it's become a huge obstacle for us because nobody wants to give you a fire permit. Most of the spaces where we want to pray and have ceremony are surrounded by beautiful trees. But that doesn't mean that we're irresponsible with fire. And I have my own personal experience of enjoying a park, which was a 2,000-year-old village of my great-grandfather. I went there to offer prayers for the acorn season. And when I went, I knew to burn sage. I had it in a shell and I offered prayer to the creek. So I had my feet in the creek and I offered that beautiful picture that was captured by one of my relatives that was there, to the people that were in charge of that park in that place. And they didn't want to post it on their website because they didn't want to endorse fire. But what I was doing was praying. And what I was doing was praying in a very sacred way that my ancestors did for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's those rules that are put in these places aren't for me in my prayer. Those are for irresponsible people that don't know how to control themselves, who maybe like fireworks, who maybe do barbecues, but not for what I'm there for and not for what I have to offer. And I've had a lot of encounters with a lot of Park Service people who don't think it's right that I burn sage, but I'll continue to burn sage because that's the way we pray. And I'll continue to honor that fire because that fire is what we need to continue on. And that fire is not only a force that takes, but it's a rebirth of life. So we'll always respect that fire so much that our people have stories of the fire. The fire came from the hummingbird, and that's why his throat is red. And that's how important the fire is to our people, that we tell stories of it till this day.
Thank you. And I'll throw in another question, and of course, Francis and Leslie, you can still comment on anything that's been offered. I think that question of responsibility is key, right? To be able to say, if you only view fire as purely destructive in particular ways, then you narrow your view of the responsibility that comes with it, and to actually practice that. And it reminds me of being able to say with call-ins and call-outs, sometimes as maybe like, I care about you, I'm willing to extend this relationship of responsibility because we need to do a little prescribed burning here to have a healthy landscape for what we want to grow. And I think, and the reason I'm using this is because I think so much mechanistic language has also seeped into the way that we value things. How we say like, there's a well-oiled machine to describe a team of people, rather than saying, well, what if that were a resilient meadow? Like, how does that change your mind about how we would work together? So I want to throw another example. One that I think has become more popular is this idea of like the mycelial network and fungus connections, and the health of a forest is so related to how this network is there. And this is not to over romanticize, right? Because sometimes people think, oh, they're so giving and generous. Like they're also just surviving. They're doing their thing, and they're showing us that collaboration can lead to a lot of thrivability beyond what we might, what I would say that the old traditional Darwin model that was, as Leslie mentioned, so species centered as like survival of the fittest, and maybe doesn't think about collaboration as a factor. So I was curious how that resonates with you both in terms of the ecological sense, but what that means about like health of community.
I can go first, Leslie, if that's okay. Well, just piggybacking on what all y'all said, whether it's Linnea talking about the diversity of voices that are required in order to have a good fire management plan, to Carla so eloquently putting her family's and her ancestors' experiences with fire as being sacred and a gift from the Creator to us. And your question really sort of ties it together because of that collaboration that we have in our ecological systems and that we should have in our human political structures. And of course, we have the outgoing administration saying things like, where's your rakes, and how come you're not raking the forest, to the denouncement of science and all these things that point to how succession of fire has shaped the landscape of what we now know as California in a healthy way, like Linnea alluded to as well. You have these varying perspectives that at first looks like they're different from one another and even opposing viewpoints, but they don't have to be mutually exclusive of one another. In fact, there are many park organizations and tribal organizations coming together because parks have found open spaces, and trust that the people who have been doing this from the jump are the ones who know best how to manage the land in a healthy way, in a reciprocal way, giving fire and also taking from the land, so that you're honoring the way that your ancestors have lived on that land since the beginning of time. So I think that if we look at it in that viewpoint, where you have different varying perspectives that can come together to collaborate on these projects, then we can continue to move forward in having a healthy ecosystem and restoring, hopefully, a semblance to what it used to be before colonization.
Thank you, Francis. Leslie?
Sure, I'll jump in. I was actually thinking about this idea yesterday, some thought, and I thought, you know, what I just chose to do, my career calling of connecting folks, is sort of like the mycelium itself. Like, I don't believe in creating things or speaking for communities. I think in terms of restoration and representation, it's really important to look at what the community needs are and have things that are community driven. And so what I like to do is think of all those that are in the community and meet them and talk to them and know how they want to experience nature, experience the redwoods, experience the sequoias. It's like, and also when I think about resources, like within this mycelium world, like underground, like they're sharing resources, they're sharing information, and that is what I'm trying to do, is like making sure that communities' voices are being shared, making sure that their information is being shared, so that this is the future of stewardship. It's not one point of view. It's all of those that inhabit. So I think it's a great analogy or metaphor, but it really keeps you thinking about our role and the role of connecting.
Yeah, and I think to me it always prompts questions like, then what does mycelial leadership look like? How do you embody mycelial leadership and so forth? Linnea and Carla, if you want to add in something, and I just want to, for the audience, if you have any questions, throw them in there, but we're going to continue the conversation. We'll see if any come up.
I can add, just going to kind of piggyback on what Francis and Leslie said in terms of connecting people and that mycelial network that you were talking about, Jose, I think also comes back to, can be related to fire too, because the more we leave fire out of our ecosystem, the more homogeneous our ecosystem becomes. And with more fire, or we increase the diversity within our ecosystem, and those mycelial networks, like you said, are not just sharing resources, and like Leslie said, not just sharing resources with themselves, but sharing resources with each other, with other species. And so the more diversity we increase, with fire above ground, we're also going to have more of that increase of information and resource sharing underground, and that's going to continue to promote a resilient ecosystem. And just like Leslie said, connecting people as if we were a mycelial network together, I think it's a great metaphor for how we can relate to how we manage the land and how we view ourselves on the land and with each other. If we are within mycelial networks and sharing resources and increasing diversity and increasing resilience.
And I think that's a reminder that as much as we value the beautiful, iconic redwoods, so much of that is also dependent on what is healthy underground, right? I think so. It's not an either or. Carla, anything you would add? Otherwise, I'll kind of lead us into a closing question. No? So, no? All right, so I'll close with this one before we'll do kind of our closing statements. This idea of difference, of diversity, and how like we value diversity in the ecological sense. I would always joke is few people say that's a beautiful monoculture of a forest, right? I love how all the how it's all exactly all the same trees. And when it comes to people, it's like almost we'll stumble as if like we kind of value difference, but then we struggle with really understanding what it means to engage with difference. And two lessons, two examples for me have come how nature treats borders, right? That rarely does nature have very rigid bifurcating borders. Humans, we do the opposite. We create border walls, for example. And so in ecology, you have like the ecotone or the edge effect, where like a meadow and a forest come in, and that's a zone of abundance. Or the way that a river flows, emergence comes from divergence, difference, and convergence. So I have to engage with some pulling away, and then with what connects me together, and that creates a flow that's not channelized. Again, humans do the opposite. Let's channel the river. So I'm just curious what comes for you in terms of those lessons about what is the beautiful thing about engaging with difference? How is it this kind of ability to heal sever connections and build what we're looking for?
I'll just go ahead and jump in, but I love the idea of first of all, no walls, and and I'm always just impressed and when I think of like wildlife and those who like share different habitats and how they're so adaptable to changing in different landscapes. Like they can exist in two different landscapes. And I see that as like being adaptable and open to the different worlds that they can live in. So like when I think about like hiking from the rainforest or from the mountains into a rainforest, like the species that live in between those two are so adaptable to both. And I think that's the beauty of diversity is just you can adapt, you become resilient because you experience different environments, you experience different points of view, and that makes you, in my mind, like that's what I would love to see more of.
Thank you. Anybody else? Francis?
Yeah, definitely would like to talk a lot about this seemingly metaphorical relationship that you can connect with ecological communities and human communities as well. And oftentimes folks will, look at that and say, oh, that's a nice coincidence, but it's not. It's all interrelated because we are a part of the ecological community, the anthropogenic climate change that we're causing, to the border walls that we're trying to put up, which of course inhibit any type of wildlife corridors that we are, putting in every place else, hopefully, and restoring the health of many ecosystems. Dams are being broken down. The lake behind me, hopefully the water management system is learning from their lessons of the past of mismanaging all the different types of water, especially here in California, where it's a huge issue and where we put our water resources. And, like Jose, when you alluded to riparian corridors, to the borders, to all the channelization. Now, thankfully, the past couple of decades, daylighting of creeks has been a big thing. I think that we're reversing that trend so that we can not only restore our ecosystems, but also the people who have been there. A lot of the reservoirs from Hetch to Los Vaqueros here in the Bay Area have submerged villages that have been there from the beginning of time. And that's a big deal because you're putting these sacred places where ancestors are buried underwater because you want to have hydropower. And there are other ways of doing things where we can diversify our green and ecological energy resources so that they honor those relationships with the land rather than denigrating them or putting them aside and continuing to enact the genocide that's been happening to indigenous folks here. So having all those things in mind are important when you're doing land management and water management decisions into the future.
Awesome. And I want to just acknowledge we're going to get close to the time, so I want to make sure nobody gets cut off. So Carla, we'll go over to you, and then Linnea, and we'll go around to make sure you have the opportunity for any closing thought and how, what are ways that people can support you?
I say that the ways to support me and the work that I do is to go check out our website, Costanoan Rumsen .org. You can also go to Sacred Facebook, and you can subscribe to us there at Costanoan Rumsen Tribe. Also, you can find me on Instagram. We have an Instagram page too. I myself am an artist, and I do jewelry, so you can find my art, which is oil painting and shell jewelry, at Instagram. But really, I think it's to provide source access. We do a lot of public engagements. We do a lot of land acknowledgements in honor in the Bay Area. And so if you have any knowledge of how we can best contribute in that way, or access to source, or even know the right people to talk to in order to have campouts or anything like that, please let us know and get in contact. And any advocating that you can do for the indigenous people of where you live is great. Please advocate for them and always acknowledge the suffering that they had to go through in order for you to exist where you are today.
Thank you. And Linnea, Leslie, and Francis.
Thanks, Jose, and thanks, Carla. Keep it brief. I think just in terms of support, I think it's, you know, it's so crucial that we continue to connect, especially youth, to outdoor spaces so that we can foster that connection at a young age and, you know, foster in the next generation of young stewards for the land, and really be more I think we need to be more mindful of how we are connecting those people to the land and and our youth to the land, and be more mindful of so many diverse perspectives and diverse connections, both historical and present, to the land. And we need to continue to teach that. We need to continue to teach what was, you know, the history of what was done here to our youth, so that they can hopefully start moving in more progress. And I think that's really the key thing for creating a more resilient community overall throughout our state and really within our country. But in terms of connecting with ecology, I think that we create resilience by increasing diversity.
Thank you. Leslie and Francis, we're down to the last 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll keep mine really short, but basically for me, what I think is the key thing is for support is to build relationships. So reach out, let me know about you and your love for the redwoods or giant sequoias and nature and your community. So you can get in touch through outreach at Save the Redwoods League. Outreach at SaveTheRedwoods.org is the actual email, and let's have conversations, because that's the only way we're going to build relationships and understand each other. Thank you.
And Francis, you get the final word.
Oh, that's usually not the case. Lots of my relationships. No, I'm just kidding. Well, sticking with the alliteration of relationships, reconnecting, resilience as well is really important, as we all have been talking about, with our own communities, our own individuality, but, you know, not focusing on the rugged individualism that Teddy Roosevelt espoused back in the 1900s, but the mycelial network that we need to have to be able to reconnect with one another. I also want to just finish by saying that despite our resilience, we don't want to have that resilience be further permission for our oppression, because we need to work together to move forward, make sure that we are not looking at the colonized viewpoint of our structural organizations, but more so looking at that world viewpoint that José put out in the second flow chart that he put out. So I'm gonna thank you for having me, José.
Yes, and thank you all. Regrettably, we are at time, so we have the final closing word from our host, and thank you all. I know we didn't get to everything we wish we could have.
Thank you, Jose. From Wild Scenic Film Festival, I want to thank all of you for participating and sharing your valuable perspectives with us and our audience. Audience, for those of you watching, if you'd like to continue this conversation, please pop over to the Zoom virtual lobby for some productive and interesting conversations. Everyone have a wonderful day. And again, thank you for participating. We really value you.